an important issue, not only just for the purpose of education and also to build the nation. The reason to say this sentence, when the Kothari Commission was appointed, the Education Commission on July 14, 1964, after deliberating nearly for 2.5 years, the report was written in 4 volumes. It is named as National Development Report. The very first sentence of the report starts with, I quote, the destiny of the nation is being shaped in our classroom. I think probably this is the vision statement. If you want to really realize the goals mentioned in the preamble of the Constitution to make India a socialist, secular, sovereign, democratic republic, I don't see anything other than education as an important tool to achieve that. So, therefore, in my opinion, the very fundamental question that we need to deliberate in the People's Parliament is what should be the normative framework whenever we formulate policies? What should be the normative framework that should guide us to formulate the policies? If you look at very briefly the historical background of making policies in education, and it was really something shocking. Nearly for 18 years, there was no education policy in India after Constitution was rolled out. Though education was a fundamental thing in the Constitution, the only time-bound, Article 45 of the Constitution, it was not fundamental to our rulers. I think we need to recognize that, irrespective of the political parties. It was not a fundamental. So therefore,
But here the purpose is different. The purpose is that it should rotate into Indianness.
the Constitution and the values guided by the Constitutions, which we call it as a rights-based framework. A rights-based framework should be, if you look at the international literature today, the rights-based framework is well defined under 4 A's. Whenever you make a policy or you formulate a policy, you should address 4 A's, and the first A stands for whether education is available for all. Availability should be the fundamental question that we need to address, whereas order of the day is more of a denial rather than the kind of providing access to education. So therefore, whether education, in a sense, whatever defined in the constitutions, irrespective of caste, creed, religion, social status, whether education is available to all children from PG to from KG to PG is the issue that we need to address. Then the accessibility. Maybe there are institutions which are available, but the question is whether we can access that. Whether affordability, if you look at the very first letter in the 2019 draft policy, it talks about, affordability. But whether the education is, affordable to all poor, all children, particularly from the lower state of the society, is the fundamental question that we need to address in a policy document. Then the third question, which we are talking in terms of the contents of education, where we have, removed the theory of evolution, forget about peddling with the history, even the science books, whether it is the theory of evolutions, Mendeleev's periodic table. So we have to ask the third A, whether it is acceptable to all, whether the education that what we are providing today, whether it is acceptable to all, really providing the kind of education that could really take us forward in accordance with the values enshrined in the Constitution. And the last question is adaptability. This is very important in a cooperative federalism. The real conflict today is between the union and the state government. Whether the state governments have the kind of right to adopt the kind of policy that they need for the social, according to their socio-political context is the fundamental question that we need to have. You can't have one policy throughout the nation. You can't have one policy throughout the nation. The policy should be only a guiding document to enable the states to have their own, education policy, which could help them, based on their social. Unfortunately, I just want to place it on record. Immediately after, coming to power in Karnataka, the Karnataka state government constituted a state education policy commission. And the policy was, almost for 2 years deliberated on the policy, and the policy was submitted. But even today, forget about adopting the policy. The policy document has not been released for the public to discuss on the matter, to discuss on the policy. So therefore, somewhere I feel, irrespective of the political affiliations, more or less all the political parties are, kind of have the same kind of attitude when the question of education, particularly building a national system of education, more or less we are following the same kind of approach and also the attitude. So therefore, I just take about a couple of minutes to flag certain important issues, how the people's education policy should be something different from the one that was, kind of formulated in 2020, that is national policy, national education policy. I think education as an entitlement, which is based on the rights approach, should be the cornerstone for any education policy. If you look at particularly the international instruments right from UDHR 1948, Article 26, today, like Article 21A in the Constitution, all these, framework, what I call it as a normative framework, provides the rights-based approach to formulate our policies. I think justiciable access to all children from KG to PG should be the guiding principle to build a national system of education. Therefore, if you look at PEP, I have gone through the policy document. It asserts very strongly on the fundamental human right as a basis, provide education, which is enforceable, and also it is state obligation. It should be the state obligation. The moment you say human right, the moment you say fundamental right, it is always against the state where they have a bounded duty to provide education for all children. So therefore, I think that approach is completely missing if you look at national education policy. The very language of the policy is more of denial. If you look at particularly, page 4 of the policy, right from class 3, it says very clearly, if children are not coming to class 3, no problem. They can access education through online and digital, media. I think this is the great injustice. Unless you provide at least 12 years of solid general education to children, how do we build India as per the, values embedded in the constitutions? Therefore, I think we need to deliberate on this. Number two, already many friends have mentioned about it. In a very simple way, the national education policy could be characterized under 4 C's. Number one, too much of centralization. The entire policy talks only about centralization. The classic example for that now is the bill that what we are all talking about, Vikasit Bharat Shiksha Adhishtan bill. So it's a classic example. Even the funding, which was earlier with the UGC, now it is the Ministry of Education. And one can imagine what will happen to the universities across the state. Whatever little that what we are getting will also be taken away based on the political, kind of understanding. Number two, too much of communalization, saffronization of education and communalization of education. And that is clearly seen like what is happening in the rewriting of books. And this time, it is not just confined to only history books. It is for science, maths, and all other textbooks. So I think probably that is another character of the national education policy. Corporatization. I think one of the biggest questions that we need to address in the People's Parliament when we go before the state for changes, for asking changes in the education policy, we need to understand who are the people running education today. These are the elected representatives, MPs, MLAs, and unfortunately, Swamijis also have joined with them in many places. So, how can you really ask them to give an education which is a tool for emancipation? So therefore, I think we need to understand our struggle should be much more than, like just asking certain fundamental things with the existing, arrangement. So corporatization is one of the basic character. And lastly, commodification of education. You don't believe cities like Bangalore for LKG, it's almost about 5 to 6 lakhs for LKG. And one can imagine what is happening at the, ISA. So therefore, this approach should be completely abandoned. The fundamental question, education policy, education is a social good. Education is a tool for social transformation. Education is a tool for emancipation. That should be the basis. It is not, the kind of whether, it is controlled by the center, private. That is not really the question that we need to address. Whether education remain as a social good for the entire, society should be the fundamental question. So, how do we really bring in those values into our policy is really an important issue that we're. And the third, financing education. Somebody was mentioning about the Education Commission. Education Commission recommended 6% of the GDP long back. It's almost about 60 years now. And even today, in terms of GDP, what we are spending is 0.07%, 0.47. No, sir, that is average. Average is 3.9, which has come down to 2.9 now. If you look in terms of GDP, it is 0.47%, which has come down, which was earlier in 2014, 0.7% and come down to 0.47. What is that we are going to build with 0.47%? Not even 1%. Look at in 1919 when right to education was enacted, that was Majumdar committee suggested, even if you increase 1% of the GDP, you can give wonderful quality education to all children. It was the recommendation of the Tapas Majumdar committee in 1999. But what happened to right to education now? It's completely derailed. Not even a single sentence in the national education policy. Forget about a separate chapter on, taking forward. So therefore, I think the fundamental question is the finance. I think we have to demand, given today, it's not just 6%, at least minimum 10% of the GDP should be earmarked for the education. And similarly, the states. States are also, take for example, states like Karnataka, I'm sorry to say this. They were almost, there is a plan to close down 23,683 schools. And in that place, they want to have 6. It's kind of a order of the day. In the last 10-15 years, at the national level, we have almost closed down 1,20,000 schools, as per the UDI's report. So therefore, finances, unless you invest in education, you can't really build a national system of education, which really an important tool for the transformation of the entire, Indian society. I think we need to address the issue of finances, and certainly we have to tell what should be the allocation in terms of GDP and what should be allocation in terms of the budget that probably the central government is. And what is very interesting in the central government budget, whatever the money that is allotted for Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, it's a vehicle for implementing the right to education. 91% of that money comes from the education cess. So literally you are giving 9% implement the Right to Education Act. I think probably we have to answer these, fundamental questions and we have to deliberate on this in the parliament. Number four, structure of school education is very, very important. I always tell NEP is a toolkit to destroy whatever little that we have today. And also, it's a toolkit for their political, kind of to achieve their political goal of establishing Hindu Rashtra. That is a very simple way of understanding the national education policy. So whatever the structure that we have, 10 plus 2 plus 3, which has been evolved in almost last 75 years, 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. Wow, I can't understand even having worked in education for nearly 40 years. The very simple suggestion made by the CAPE committee, extend RTE both downward and upward. Bring 2 years of pre-primary education to make it a fundamental right. And from 8 years, extend another 4 years to bring secondary and higher secondary education into the ambit of right to education. That is the best way of building a 10 plus 2 fundamental right to education for all children. But what we are doing, we are doing the other way around. We are doing that also is being more or less destroyed. So therefore, we need to understand the structure of the education should more or less should continue like what we have done in the last 75 years. And now the new proposal, digital versus, is classroom. Wherever we go, we talk about digital, online. See, basically we have to understand education. The purpose of education is socialization. The very purpose is social. How can you do? How can you really make children to mix with others, socialize themselves, unless you have one-to-one, kind of interaction? So therefore, this entire idea of digital versus, the classroom, I think we need to address very, prominently. For the because of the time constraint, probably I will just, conclude with this. So the last question, probably that we need to, answer. In my opinion, having worked in education for nearly 4 decades, I think now the time has come to place a demand that we need nationalization of education, at least at the school level. At least at the school level, education should be nationalized and it should be assured to every child based on the common school system, which was recommended by the Education Commission in 1964-66 should be the main goal that we need to really place before the government. I think in that direction, the parliament that what we are deliberating today will guide as a vision document for the entire country to decide what kind of education policy that the country needs. So with this, I wish all the very best for all the deliberations in different groups. And I just want to say that I am always with the All India Education Committee to contribute whatever little that I could do in the rest of my life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Friends,